Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Cycle 2016. We have coming up next a dear friend of mine and a real firebrand for liberty and just cogent thinking, Marc Victor. If you ever dare to cross intellectual swords with this man, be advised he will come back at you. And that's a good thing. We all need to be challenged with our ideas, and Marc is, if nothing else, fearless on challenging people on their ideas. He's also an attorney, so watch out. Fortunately, he's one of the good guys. He makes his living fighting the state for people who end up on the wrong side of that equation. So for many reasons, we all love Marc, and we're very happy. This is the first time you've addressed us here at Cycle, and we're looking forward to your talk. Your turn, Marc.
Okay. Are you going to turn that camera around or something like that so I can see who I'm speaking to? Not that I don't enjoy looking at you, Lobo.
Yeah, yeah. You tell that to all the pretty boys.
You know, every line Marc is online too.
Right. Okay.
What time is it there?
Bye.
So what time is it there? I was going to say good morning, but it occurs to me it might not be morning there.
No, it's not.
It's 6:30 in the afternoon.
Oh.
No, you are in a hard situation.
Oh, well.
Almost.
Well, good evening then. So it's true, my name is Marc Victor, and really honored to speak with you guys and gals. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about me so you know who I am. I served in the United States Marine Corps from 86 to 92. I was part of that Desert Storm operation that you guys look too young to recall. And graduated from Arizona State University. I studied criminal justice while I was there. I've always had a love for that. Went to law school in 94. I graduated and was admitted to the bar, and I've had my own law firm since 1997. And we're growing. We've got a national criminal practice now. I represent people in criminal cases really from anything as minor as little ridiculous zoning ordinances and things like that to first-degree murder with the death penalty alleged. I've done those many times. I've done lots of federal cases, and I do cases in other states now as well. So there's not very much in the criminal law world that I haven't done and I'm not familiar with, and I don't have opinions on and state them on the record on many occasions. I also do lots of speeches. I promote freedom. I'm the attorney for freedom. That's where you can find me on the internet. If you just do attorneyforfreedom.com, you'll find my law firm. And I'm an activist. I'm not shy about being for freedom. I don't care if people disagree with me. I like that better because it gives me an opportunity to win another heart and mind. We've moved into doing civil rights. So I sue police officers now in city governments and state governments and the federal government as well, and I'm enjoying bringing lawsuits against the king and the king's men. It's one of my favorite things to do. And generally promoting freedom, I use my law firm to promote freedom. Freedom for me is one of the most important things in life. I rank it equal to things like health. I think if you don't have your health, you don't have much of anything else. I feel the same way about freedom. It's great to be healthy, but if you're incarcerated, it's not so great. So it's really one of the main goals of my life. I think I met Lobo back at the Freedom Summit, which was a seminar that I started with another Freedom Yahoo guerrilla warrior out here named Ernie Hancock. And we brought in lots of good speakers, and I also do radio shows, and I'm on TV a lot out here, and spoken for Doug Casey, who you may or may not know, and I also write a lot of articles. I've written tons of different articles on freedom. They're all on my website if you're interested, and we've also done lots of videos. So anyways, I want to talk a little bit about the law and how the law relates. I don't know, are you all from Lithuania?
No.
Where are you all from?
We have Ukrainians, Belarusians, Lithuanians, Americans, Peruvians, and an online audience of unknown dimensions.
Okay, fantastic. So I want to talk a little bit about, most of it will be, you know, United States law and some things of that nature, but I think it's relevant everywhere. I think the theme of what I would say in terms of the law if I had an overall general theme, it's going to be, doesn't really matter to me much what's written down, right? What the Constitution says, what the statutes say, that's less important to me than what is in the hearts and minds of the people. Because my take on it is I would much rather live in a society where the hearts and minds of the people were libertarian without any rules than a very good constitution with libertarian principles among the people in the society now, many of whom, or most of whom, have never heard of things like the non-aggression principle, have no concept of initiation of force and why that's a problem. And so another way of stating it is if you just took people who were really for freedom, like me and Lobo and a whole bunch of other people you may or may not know, and put us on the Supreme Court and we were in charge of interpreting the law, you'd get a free society pretty fast. You wouldn't have to change anything, just change the people who are interpreting the law. So with that in mind, I don't really focus my time much on changing the law. What I want to change are hearts and minds. I want to educate people in what I believe, which is that we as humans, and this is really the fundamental disagreement to me, we libertarians think that we could have a good society, that we could still be productive, we could live happy lives, we could get along just fine, we could have good commerce and capitalism, and people could have high standards of living without having to boss our neighbors around by force, without initiating force. That's our group, right? I like to say sometimes there are two different races. The first race, my people, those who believe we don't have to force our neighbors to live happy lives, and we shouldn't do that, that's wrong. Then there's the other group who thinks that, no, it's okay to force people into doing things that they don't want to do, and they're just arguing about what types of things should we force them into, to what extent. We should take their money, that's okay to take their money. We can argue about how much we should take, when we should take, what types of things we should use the money for. I don't get into those arguments because my group of people says, if it's your money, you get to decide what happens with it. I could try to persuade you all I want, and understanding the difference between coercion, which is forcing somebody, and persuading somebody, trying to convince them, that's an important part of freedom to me, because persuasion's okay. I may try to persuade you into doing all kinds of things. Lobo knows last time I saw him, I've decided to adopt a whole food, plant-based diet, and I eat that way now, and I think it's the best way to eat. I think it's the healthiest thing. I think it's a great thing. So I try to convince Lobo to eat that way. But if he disagrees and he decides he likes to still eat meat and drink dairy and all that stuff, that's his choice, right? It's his body. It's not my decision. But that doesn't stop me from trying to persuade him every time I see him. And there's nothing wrong with that. So I'm going to suspect that, oh, if you guys have questions, feel free to chime in anytime. I love questions. But first I want to lay out what I would call more of the case for pessimism, right? I mean, at the end of the day, whether you're optimistic or whether you're pessimistic, it's really your choice, right? You get to control whether you're optimistic about freedom or whether you're pessimistic in terms of the outlook for freedom. And there's a good case for both. I choose to be optimistic. I think the case is stronger for optimism, actually. But pessimism is maybe the easier case to make. So let me lay some of it out. I think that, and this is going to be true probably for any government, right? There are powers of the government, and then there are individual rights, your rights. And governments always act the same way. If it comes to a power of the government, they interpret that very broadly, very expansive. If the government has a power, it almost always will include an expansive definition. They can do this, that, and then, yeah, also they can do this, and they can do the next thing, and they can do the next thing, and it's forever expanding. If it's a right of yours, like in the United States we have a right to free speech, or right to keep and bear arms, or rights against unreasonable searches and seizures, those are always construed very strictly and very narrowly because it's the government that's doing the construing. So if it's your right to keep and bear arms, they say, yes, you have a right to a gun, but only under these circumstances and only if you meet this criteria and only in these kinds of places and only with this kind of training, and on and on and on and on. And it's the same for all liberties. So, governments have that power right now to interpret what the law is. And so long as government has that power, they're always going to interpret expansively for them and constrictively in a very narrow way for you. They also have the power to print money. Governments love that power. That's a very, very bad idea, to let the government control the money supply. In the United States, we used to be based on a gold standard. So there was a finite amount of money, right? Because each dollar represented, there was some value behind it. There was gold that the dollar was just sort of representing. But the government has abandoned this concept, and now they're just pieces of paper. So part of the problem with this is the government can print up as much money as it wants. And by doing that, they can, in essence, steal from you just by having money in your pocket. They can devalue the money, and that's a very important, serious power that government has that we ought to be very concerned about. Also, they have the power to tax and spend. This is a really important power too, because even if the government doesn't have the power to do a certain thing, like let me give you an example. In the United States, the federal government does not have the power to determine what level of impairment is appropriate for a DUI. That's a state thing. The states determine at what level blood alcohol content is at a certain point to where it becomes a crime for a driving under the influence. So everybody agrees the federal government doesn't have that power. But what they did was they took money from people in the states, and they said, if you want that money for things like highway projects and things of that nature, well, then you have to voluntarily agree to change that level. So, as one of our Supreme Court justices said many years ago, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And it's also the power to control. And that's a huge issue that governments have. They can also go to war. That's a very important power too. There is a requirement in the United States Constitution that says if they want to go to war, Congress has got to declare war. Well, it sounds great, but our Congress hasn't declared war since World War II. And yet you wouldn't say that the United States hasn't been at war. The rub is they get to decide what a war is. And it could be just, well, this is just a military exercise or some kind of an intervention. It's not officially a war, so Congress doesn't have to declare war. That effectively has nullified that check on going to war. Part of the problem is with democracy is that people confuse freedom and democracy. If you notice, many of our presidents go around the world and they talk about both things together as if they're the same thing. Freedom and democracy, democracy and freedom as if they're spreading the same thing. But that's really not true. Democracy is majority rule, right? I mean, democracy is sort of a gang of thugs. However many people can get together, and if they agree, that's it, they have a democratic vote and they impose their will on the minority. That's, to me, incompatible with freedom. Freedom is about self-rule. Freedom is about you being in charge of your body, your money, your time, your property. So I would say that freedom and democracy are mostly incompatible. They don't go together. Anytime you hear somebody talking about freedom and democracy as if they're the same thing, you should stop and think. There's that saying about, 9 wolves and a sheep deciding what's for dinner, right? I mean, they can have a democratic vote, and of course the 9 wolves will vote having the sheep for dinner, and it's a perfect democratic issue. Just like the majority of people can get together and impose their will on the minority. We wouldn't call that a free society. I would call that tyranny of the majority over the minority. And part of the problem today, what our founding fathers wanted, the people who actually signed the Declaration of Independence, who have no connection to the people who now celebrate the Declaration of Independence and shoot off fireworks and such in the United States like they did yesterday, what they wanted was very few things up for a vote. I mean, there might be some things that could be up for a vote that I would never disagree. If I was there, I might say, hey, what do you want to do tonight? Do you want to have a campfire, or do you want to go play basketball or something? I might say, I know, let's vote on it. And if everybody agrees to vote and we make a decision, and I would just simply abide by whatever we decided on. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. That's not something that shouldn't be up for a vote. But if we said we want to vote on the money in Lobo's wallet, Lobo might complain about that, and I expect he probably would, and he should, because we don't have a right to vote on his property. That's the problem with voting. Today, everything is up for a vote. And the typical American, and I would even say the typical person around the world, they think that just because something was voted on, it's okay to impose your will in that direction because the vote went that direction. And I disagree with that. Incidentally, I think whether one votes or doesn't vote is largely a symbolic act, and I don't vote because, for starters, my one vote's never going to affect anything in any of these elections in any event, and so I acknowledge that. But beyond that, it's sort of a symbolic statement, right, whether you vote or not. And to me, what it symbolizes is if you vote, just like on the basketball versus the campfire, if you vote, I think what you're really saying is, I agree to be bound by whatever the majority agrees. And in some cases I might agree with that, but in most cases I don't. Also, traffic stops, everybody knows in every country, this is probably one of the fastest ways to get into the system. And traffic stops in the United States now are very, very routine. Our courts have said it doesn't even matter what the officer was thinking. If they can find any reason to pull any person over, from a cracked windshield to bald tires to 1 mile an hour over the speed limit, then it's a valid stop. And once the officer has pulled somebody over, there's a whole host of rights that go along with that, including the right to detain people, the right to ask for their papers, driver's licenses, registration, proof of insurance. They can boss you out of a vehicle. They can ask questions about if people have firearms. They can now demand to take possession of the firearms. So to me, traffic stops are one of the most common interactions between citizens and the government, and this is yet another area where the government has given almost carte blanche to allow officers to do whatever they want. Many of the rights that you might be familiar with in the United States, like free speech, these have been strictly construed as well, as I was talking about. Yes, you have a right to free speech, but no, you can't decide whatever time to speak. We have things called time, place, and manner restrictions, and so the government can control the microphone, right? But as you'll find out as you think about these issues more, everything is really property, right? You could have a right to free speech, but if I control the microphone and I control the place where you're speaking, then you really can't speak freely. So keep your eye on the property ball, because that's what's mostly important. The Second Amendment, you hear a lot about this in terms of guns, and I don't know how you all feel about guns, but to me this is like any other freedom. I think a gun is a piece of property, and a gun can be used like any other piece of property for good things or for bad things, just like cars, right? Sometimes people misuse cars and they're irresponsible with cars. They get drunk and they drive on the wrong side of the road and they kill people, or even worse, they intentionally run people down. I don't see that as a reason to think that cars are bad or that all people should be banned from having cars. I feel the same way about guns. I have the big scary AR-15 assault rifles in my house with lots of ammunition. I also have lots of handguns and shotguns, and I got a .50 caliber. I got all kinds of stuff in my house, and I've never had a problem, ever. My guns are responsibly maintained, and I would only use them in a defensive situation. And why the government would think that they could take guns away from peaceful, responsible people is outrageous to me. And I hope to you too, and especially there in Europe, where it almost seems, I got friends in Europe, and sometimes they have trouble understanding our I wouldn't even say love of guns, just our love of freedom. The fact, frankly, I'm not really much of a gun guy at all. I have guns because I can, because I feel like having guns, and plus, if somebody breaks into my house, I don't necessarily want to fight them. I'd rather pull out a gun and shoot them. That's what my guns are for. I don't want to have to rely on other people with guns coming to my house. I got to make a phone call and call somebody to come with a gun and then hope that they show up in time. That seems ridiculous to me, and free people should never settle for this. We have lots of great sounding protections here. Nobody can be denied life or liberty or property. None of that can be taken away without due process of law. But the government decides what due process of law is. I have several cases right now that are forfeiture cases where the government has decided, they don't like something that a client of mine did, which usually will involve something like growing marijuana. We all know marijuana is no big deal today. Even the government people are starting to admit this. But this is now one of their prohibited plants. And if you have one of these plants, even in your backyard, the government can come in and take all of your property, including all of your money. Make it hard for you to get a lawyer to even fight this stuff. I've got a case right now just last week where they took hundreds of thousands of dollars of my client's property, and if you want to fight it, you have to post a bond, which means you have to take some of your own property, which hopefully is not seized, and put that up as a bond just so you can go in and fight to say I didn't do anything wrong to try to get your property back. And as you might imagine, lots of people don't have any property left over after the government has seized their property, so they're unable to fight the government, hence they can't file a claim and they automatically lose all of their property. It's kind of a bad situation, and it's not very pro-freedom. I could go on and on and on, but the point is there's a pretty strong case that the United States, and I would say virtually every other government around the world, even including New Zealand, where I just was and is consistently ranked the freest country on the planet, every one of these governments is a police state. Some are worse than others. They have different varieties of areas where they impose and violate rights of free people, but they're all police states. So why on earth would I be optimistic for any of this stuff after laying this out? Well, one reason is I think it's all going to change. I think that the same reason the Soviet Union is no longer with us, happily, because it wasn't some great philosophical uproar. It was the fact that they just simply couldn't afford to be a police state anymore, and so they had to break that up. Now, admittedly, what's flowered up hasn't been all wonderful. Russia's still not a model of a free society, but other places are. I was in Estonia not too long ago, and Estonia, in my opinion, is one of the freest countries on the planet. The issue is the government is going to collapse under the weight of its own debt. What's going to take place? What's going to arise up afterwards? That's where we can be optimistic, because more and more people are becoming libertarian. And I love it. I think things are changing dramatically. For starters, we've got the better argument, right? I mean, capitalism just works better than socialism. If you look around the world and you travel most places, you'll find that places that have a lot of capitalism, places that have free trade, places that have less restrictions on trade, they have higher standards of living. This is the reason why the United States is the superpower of the world. Besides all the things that I've laid out, we've had, relative to other countries, a better free market for a longer period of time. We've done a better job than a lot of places keeping church and state separate. Even though we've got a lot of crazy restrictions on trade, it hasn't always been like that. We've had a relatively free market. This has been a place where people can come, just like I did, and start a business with very little to no money and do a good job for people and make money and become wealthy. When you have a society like that, you're going to create wealth. And when you create wealth, that's what the definition of a superpower is, right? The United States has a lot of money. We have a strong economy, or at least relative to other places, we have a strong economy. And that's the reason. It's not because the God has smiled on us. It's not because the Lord loves Americans more than he loves other people around the world. It's because we've done a better job with a free market. And anywhere you go around the world, if you find somewhere that's got a decent free market and they've had it for a long time, you'll find standards of living rising. And if you find a place where corruption is rampant and property rights are not protected and taxes are super high and regulation is super high, you're going to find a low standard of living. And it's very sad. As I travel around the world and I look at people in different places living in horrible conditions, I always ask about the government. And of course, it's always a government that doesn't respect property rights. There are lots of other things going on. The drug war here, I'm not quite ready to declare it over yet, but it's ending. It's ending in a slow dinosaur kind of way. But 22 years ago when I started practicing, I used to run around the courts and talk about how we used to legalize marijuana. And even my fellow defense lawyer friends thought I was crazy. I was the crazy nut radical who thought that competent adults should decide what goes in their bodies, not the government. Now, things have changed. My argument for legalization of marijuana is the prevailing view at this point. And even a very conservative place like Arizona, where I am right now, has adopted medical marijuana. We're going to have on the ballot in November, just a few months, an initiative to legalize marijuana. This is not happening because the government is making a change. This is happening because hearts and minds of people are starting to change. Some of this is for the right reason. When I talk to marijuana groups, they want to talk about marijuana is not harmful and it has medical benefits and all those kinds of things, and maybe all of that's true, but I don't much care for that argument. I always try to get them to focus on the important argument, which is free people, competent adults, decide for themselves what goes in their bodies, whether it's harmful or harmless. That's the choice that free people get to make. And that argument is starting to get some traction, which is why I spend my time arguing about legalization of methamphetamine and heroin and cocaine, because that's the argument that we should be making. I concede those are horribly dangerous drugs, and I also would do my best to try to discourage. I've been trying to convince Lobo for years to not use heroin, but it's his choice. I respect it's his body, and it's his money and time and all of that, and if he wants to have sex with animals and use heroin and do whatever he wants to do, as long as the animal's consenting, I don't have any problem with it. The best I know, Lobo's never had sex with any dogs or cats that have failed to consent to his approaches. So the point here is really simple. It's about freedom. It's about self-ownership. It's about property. Everything's about property. And one of the main reasons I'm so optimistic is because we're right about this stuff. We're right. And in the long run, in a world where I can give a talk to people in Lithuania, sitting in my office in Chandler, Arizona, information flows really freely and very quickly. And it's easy for people who are living in countries that are oppressed under crazy-ass governments with all this regulation to see how people in the United States live, or for us to see how other countries are doing. We can compare Estonia and Russia and see who's living better now and see how their economy is and say, why? What's the difference here? It's easy to learn about freedom and why freedom is a good thing. And I'm not, look, information is good for us because we're on the right side of the argument. This is the reason why all these communist countries and socialist countries were always so oppressive and didn't want books coming in and didn't want the internet coming in, because they knew, their leaders knew, at some point we're not going to be able to continue to rip off the people who live in our country, because they're going to figure out that they're getting ripped off, and we don't want that. They're going to figure out that freedom and free markets and property rights are good things for them and bad things for us. So that's one of the reasons I'm very optimistic, because in the long run I know we're right and I know information is getting out, and I also see other things happening. Like, for example, I know this might sound ridiculous to people in Europe and around the world, but they just figured out gay rights here. They figured out that people who are gay have a right to marry, and it was no big deal, right? I mean, this was a major issue here in the United States. For us libertarians, it was no big deal. It was like, hey, if boys want to kiss boys, as long as they're competent adults and they're not bothering anybody, who cares? And people changed, and the reason they changed their attitudes on this is for that very reason. They said to themselves, it's none of my business. I don't really care if boys are kissing or if girls are kissing. It's their business. And that's the reason it just changed like that. And so these are what I would call libertarian attitudes, and they're starting to come to the surface. You guys probably heard about Ron Paul. He ran for president as a Republican, but he was really a libertarian. He changed a lot of hearts and minds. But for him to get into the presidential debates and to be on TV and to be saying libertarian things to the world and to have a website that people could go to and look at, I thought that was a wonderful advancement for liberty. His son Rand Paul just ran for president. He took a little bit different tact in my attitude. I still supported him. He was trying to get elected rather than just sort of say what was true, and it didn't go so well for him. But he was there, and he was in the debate. He was part of the discussion. I say the same thing now for Gary Johnson. He's running as a libertarian, but he's this far from getting into the national debates with the Republicans and the Democrats. This has never happened before. This would be the first time ever a libertarian, a real libertarian, has got into the debates with a Republican and a Democrat. I don't think Gary Johnson's the best candidate. He's not the most pure libertarian. I'd much rather have Lobo up there making the argument than Gary Johnson. But that he's there at all is a major win for us. And if he does get in the debates, it's going to encourage a lot of other libertarians to get into the Libertarian Party and make the arguments and maybe try to even get the Libertarian nomination. Not just to get elected president, but to get up there and use the microphone and speak about freedom and peace. And I think all that is super important to freedom. And also, science continues to progress. You know, with the March of Science, things have gotten better. That's how we get the internet, right? That's how we're able to travel more easily and see the rest of the world. All of this stuff is very, very positive. I think science is hurting religious fanaticism quite a bit. It may even kill religion. Religion is on a downtrend. All religions are trending down. I can tell you that that my kids, all of them, I ask them all the time, how many of your friends are religious? How many have faith-based views on things? Very, very few. Many, many of them have adopted more of a rational, science-based view. And I'm not arguing the case for being immoral. I think you can certainly be very moral based on your philosophy. I'm arguing against faith-based thinking, the kind of thinking that allows people in the Middle East to strap on bomb vests to their bodies and blow themselves up in the name of faith-based views and religious practices without any evidence. I think all of that's bad stuff. So I think that the current march of science in the retreat of religion is also a really good thing for humanity and for freedom and for markets and the economy and overall. I know this is a big statement too, and I know that people disagree with some of this stuff, but I think overall violence is less tolerated around the world. I know we still have wars, I know we still have torture, but generally when we see it now, people are more repelled by it. People, I think, more than a few hundred years ago, I think we're moving in the right direction. I think we're at least recognizing peace is good, war is bad. Settling things in rational ways and with a court hearing with due process or not private arbitration or whatever is a better way to solve disputes than hitting somebody over the head, torturing them. And I think that that's progress. I think that's humanity becoming more civilized. And that's all bodes very, very well for our position, because our position at the end of the day is we shouldn't initiate force against other human beings. That's really all we're saying, right? And as people become more and more opposed to violence, by necessity, they're more welcoming, more understanding, more inclined to adopt our position. And I also think this, we don't need to convince everybody. You're never going to convince everybody of anything. We don't need to do that. That's not one of my goals. We just need to convince more than we have now, and we'll have a free society, one way or another. And I don't know exactly what I'm not a central planner, so people do different things, right? I mean, I give speeches, I go off in court, sometimes I do seminars, but Lobo's running conferences and putting things on the internet, and people are doing different things. I don't know what you guys are doing. I hope you're doing something, whatever suits your individual talents, needs, and desires. You should do something while you're here on the planet for this very brief period of time to promote freedom, because it's the right thing to do, and it's the best thing you can do for future generations. That's how I look at it. I would like to leave the world a tad more free than I found it, maybe a lot more free if I'm able to do that. So anyways, I think we're moving in the right direction. I voluntarily choose to live in a police state. I know it's a police state, but I do it for lots of other reasons, and I'm trying to affect peace and freedom here, and I'm optimistic that I think I'm doing that. So, as I said at the beginning, I think that optimism and pessimism, I think, is a choice, and I've been pessimistic about things in my life, and I've been optimistic about things in my life, and I just find that optimism feels better than pessimism, so I choose optimism, and I do think that there's a case. I want to leave you with a couple of things about the justice system that I think are really, if I was going to make some changes just from my 22 years in the justice system, just some thoughts that I have and stuff that I do in my travels to leave you with. As I've said at the beginning, I think winning hearts and minds is everything. That's the whole ball of wax. We need to win hearts and minds for freedom. Don't focus on changing the law or getting ordinances passed or getting people elected. I don't think any of that stuff matters. If people do get elected and then they do things to change hearts and minds like Ron Paul did, fantastic. That's fine. But winning hearts and minds ought to be the goal. And so otherwise any changes to me are just going to be temporary. And because remember, any changes in the law can always be interpreted either for freedom or for tyranny. But no matter how good a justice system is, and I've said this on many occasions, I think ours in the United States is pretty good in terms of the actual system. If you come to the United States and you're accused of a crime, for the most part, you're going to get a pretty fair trial. You really are. You're going to get a lawyer who's working hard for you, even if it's a public defender. I know a lot of public defenders. Yes, they're paid for by the government, but their loyalties are to the defendant, for sure. They're going to fight hard for you. For the most part, you're going to get a judge who's pretty interested in giving you a fair trial. You're going to get an opportunity to speak your piece. You're going to get a jury that you're going to have a lot of say over in terms of who's on that. You're going to get free strikes. If you just don't like the look on their face, you're going to get rid of them. We're going to get to ask them all kinds of questions to find out if they're biased. You're going to get to bring witnesses in and have them testify. You're not going to get a railroad situation at all. I'm here to tell you that. You're going to get a mostly fair trial. That's our procedure. But our substantive law is what's screwed up. No matter how good our procedure is, if the crime is smoking a marijuana cigarette in your backyard, you may get a wonderfully fair trial. You may really be guilty, but to that I say, so what? The law is screwed up. That you got a fair trial doesn't help you a bit. I don't care about that. Until we fix the law, a fair trial is meaningless. We need to get rid of all victimless crimes everywhere, everywhere. If there's no victim, it shouldn't be a crime. So no matter how good your system is, it just doesn't matter if the law is screwed up. We can never fix the system until we fix the substantive law. Also, juries. Juries are great, but you know, you're going to get a jury that's going to be reasonably fair. But if your jury is mostly people who love the police state, then it's not so great. And if I find myself often in front of a jury explaining little technical nuances, the differences between the mens rea or the mental state of recklessness versus intentional conduct or negligence. Negligence, recklessness, and intentional conduct, those are different things. And it's hard for me to explain that to a jury in a very short period of time, which is why I think we need professional jurors. I think we need companies, private companies, who offer jury pools, who have people who are educated and understand burdens of proof, what it means, what a preponderance of the evidence means, what clear and convincing level it means, what beyond a reasonable doubt means. The average person just doesn't really understand this stuff, and so we need more education on juries. The importance of the jury. They're supposed to be the final check on government power. We should have jury nullification, right? I should be able to stand up in front of the jury and say, ladies and gentlemen, even if the government has proven their case that my guy smoked a marijuana cigarette in his backyard, who cares? You can still let him off. I can't say that today. I'm prevented from saying that, and I shouldn't be able to be prevented from saying that. I should be able to say, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you can and should judge the law as well as the facts. So that would be a major change. Also, this probably comes under the category of one of my changes that people don't understand. This is the least understood, most important kind of a change, is what we have mandatory minimum sentences. I wrote an article that talked a lot about this recently. A mandatory minimum sentence. Imagine if the crime is smoking marijuana and the punishment is 10 years in prison if you lose. That's not something you're going to be willing to take your chances at trial. Even if I tell you I think you got about a 90% chance that you're going to win at trial, and I'm never going to tell you that. The highest I ever get is 50% chance. But imagine if I told you you had a 90% chance of winning at trial. Well, that's a 10% chance of losing at trial, and if the sentence is guaranteed 10 years in prison, you're always going to take a plea. And that's the situation now with almost all of our gun crimes. So if you get into a situation with a shooting, it might even be a good shooting. You might have shot a bad guy in your house, and even with a 90% chance you win, because that's going to be a mandatory minimum sentence, you're not going to take that case to trial. And this is a way of it's a sort of a backdoor way of depriving people of their right to a jury trial. People always say, oh, well, I'll take my chances at trial. Nah, you probably won't. Not with a mandatory minimum sentence, because the risk is just too high. And the government knows this. That's why they've put these mandatory minimum sentences in there. And prosecutors are not shy about raising this with me. They say, look, Mark, your guy can't take this case to trial because if he loses, he's going to spend 20 years in prison. So when I give him a plea to probation, he has to take it. And that's the sad reality, is they're right about that. I have on many occasions walked into court and pled somebody guilty who didn't really want to plead guilty, who I didn't really think was guilty, but they couldn't afford to take the risk at trial. So that's mandatory minimum sentences. The only rational change there that I think makes any sense is letting the judge make the determination of what the sentence ought to be, because every case is different. And we can't even envision all of the possibilities why somebody might commit even a real crime, right? I mean, I could give you a fact scenario where somebody committed a murder and it really was a murder, but you might feel that, well, even though it's really a murder, this person should get probation. I could imagine facts that would lead to that kind of a conclusion. This is why if you say all murders are going to get 25 years or the death penalty, you're doing a disservice to not only people who are really innocent of the crime because they're going to be forced into taking a deal, but also to people who are really guilty who don't deserve that kind of a punishment. Caseloads. This is a huge problem everywhere. We have, because of the drug war, we have way too many cases. And when you have an overload of cases like this, you can't spend enough time on each case. I find myself lots of times, my duty as a defense lawyer is to just get the prosecutor to just focus on the case. I'm like, hey man, slow down, take a minute. Let me explain to you what the case is about. Let me explain who this person is. Let me explain what the circumstances are. Because all they see is this is the crime, this is the prior record, let's give them this deal, move on. I can't even sit down and talk to prosecutors most of the time. That's most of the time. In Maricopa County, where I'm at, we have this room called the negotiation room. I put that in quotes, the negotiation room. It's a joke. All us defense attorneys laugh every time I walk into the there's no negotiation that happens in the negotiation room. The prosecutors are locked behind an office where they make the pleas and they give them to the brand new prosecutors who have no discretion to do anything. They just simply bring the plea out and drop it on my desk and say, here's the plea. And I say, well, what about this or that? And they say, Well, for example, I might say, well, I see you have a fine here for $2,000. My guy would pay a fine of $1,500. Can we do that? Well, I don't know. I have to get that approved. So then they leave, and then they come back with an answer. I don't get to even sit down and talk to anybody anymore about the cases because they're just too busy. That needs to change. Criminal cases are so important, and what happens with people's lives, you're talking about putting people in prison like animals who shouldn't be imprisoned, by the way. We put people in cages and deprive them of their freedom. We shouldn't do this lightly. We should spend a lot of attention and time and effort in understanding everything that happened. And because of these crushing caseloads, mostly because of the drug war, we just can't fix it because we're not spending enough time. And this is some more specific to the United States, but it's hard to imagine, but our federal courts really weren't supposed to handle many crimes. They're not really set up to have big criminal courts, but we now have so many crimes on the federal level. We've got city courts now, and cities have their own ordinances and own criminal offenses, and they prosecute their cases. We have county offenses and county prosecutors. We have state-level prosecutors, attorney general, and now we have federal-level crimes. And there are so many federal crimes now that I can't even give you a number. Nobody knows how many crimes there are on the federal level. And so much of it is so poorly worded that there are many violations that we don't really know if they're civil or if they're criminal. We could still be arguing about these kinds of things. And so it's really a horrible system in terms of having all these various levels of criminal offenses. And the way we got here, again, was an expansive definition of our Commerce Clause. We have in our Constitution a clause that was put there to just make sure that the states have free trade. And what it was supposed to allow Congress the power to regulate interstate commerce, to make sure that the states were not erecting tariffs when they traded goods and services across state lines. What this has turned into is this giant source of power for the federal government to do pretty much anything it wants. Almost unlimited jurisdiction, unlimited power to do anything based on the Commerce Clause. And so even when nothing is even crossing a state line, we have cases now where, for example, in California, we had a case not too long ago where under California law, old people who were dying of cancer legally were growing and smoking marijuana in their backyard. The federal government said you can't do that. And then the people in the legally using under California law said, wait a second, you can't affect us. We're not involved in interstate commerce. The Supreme Court decided even though they're growing it in their backyard and they're using it on their own property and they're not selling to anybody, it still affects interstate commerce. And so the federal government still can regulate the activity and make it illegal for these people to use marijuana, even though the state said it was perfectly fine. So it's kind of an outrageous situation. But in my view, these are the kinds of things that need to change. I think they are changing, which is why I spend a lot of time writing and speaking out and arguing. I even ran for office at one point. I ran for United States Senate as a libertarian. I got into a debate. We had a nationally televised debate. And to my surprise, I got over 100,000 votes just here in Arizona. So again, I'm optimistic about things. I think you guys should be optimistic. You're young, and you're free enough to come to one of Lobo's conferences, and so that's pretty good. And you got your whole lives ahead of you to promote freedom. And I think you're living at a great time to promote freedom because things are actually happening. Governments are on the verge of collapse. Some of them are collapsing. We saw what just happened in Greece. Like I've said, the Soviet Union is a thing of the past, and that's a good, positive thing. What I would like you to work on now is making the case for what should replace it. And the case really is very strong for little or no government. Just let me finish with this one footnote, and I'll let you guys ask some questions. If I had to recommend one book on freedom, just one book, because I don't recommend too many books because I know everybody's busy and a lot of people don't like to read. I do audio books as I'm driving around. The book that I would recommend is For a New Liberty by Murray Rothbard. I know Lobo's familiar with it, but of the books that I've covered, that to me was probably the most pure, philosophical, hardcore, in-your-face, pro-freedom, here's why we don't need the government, and everything would still be just fine. So I really recommend that book to you if you haven't read it. You can just download the audio book onto your phone and listen to it. It's an awesome listen, and I think that if you have some objections about how a free society would really work, this book does a very, very good job at addressing it. I think it's kind of an unfair question because at the end of the day, I don't know what the market's going to come up with. But one thing I do know, if there's a problem, smart people will be sitting around trying to find out ways to fix it. And the people who fix it first are the ones in a free society who are rewarded. They're the ones who make money for fixing problems in society. I can't even envision a better system than that, where everybody is sitting around thinking of ways to provide goods and services to their fellow human beings in the most efficient, cost-effective way possible. What could possibly be wrong with a system like that? So anyways, that's all I have to say. I wanted to leave, we got about 10 minutes, I wanted to leave a little bit of time for questions for you guys. If you have.
I have a question.
Okay.
I heard that it should be no rules from the government. Is it correct?
I'm not sure I got the whole question. Something about there should be no rules.
He's asking if you're an anarchist.
Well, I'm not a big fan of labels, and I would also say that I'm a big fan of rules. I like rules. I got lots of rules in my house. If you come to my house, there'll be lots of rules, but I make the rules because I'm the owner of the house. If I come to your house, I would expect that you would have some rules, and you should be in charge of the rules. So the issue for me isn't whether or not there should be rules. The issue is who gets to make the rules. It appears that you guys are in some kind of a house or facility or hotel or something. Somebody owns that place. That's the person that I think ought to be making the rules there, right? They may have any kind of rules. They may say no guns allowed. They may say no marijuana allowed. They may say no swearing allowed. They can have any rules that they want. I'm a big fan of rules. The only issue is who's making the rules. I think the owner of the place that you're sitting or standing should be making the rules. So if you want to make the rules, then you should own a piece of property and then you can make those rules. But if the owner of this house here, they have rules that you don't like, you have a remedy for that, which is I'm not going there. If you want me to go there, you got to make rules that I like. So, frankly, I see a libertarian and an anarcho-capitalist as exactly the same thing. I don't see any difference between the anarcho-capitalist position and the libertarian position. Sometimes I just describe myself as pro-freedom. So I like rules. The only rule that really I would impose on other people, and I would impose it on other people, is they don't get to initiate force. That's the only rule that we should have, that we all abide by. You don't get to impose your views on other people by force. That's the only rule that I really like. Everything else is just sort of an expression of that one rule. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Okay, country is every citizen of a country is the owner of that country, and there is a need to make consensus of rules. So we elect some representatives to make the rules that are consensus.
Did you get that, Mark?
What I got is everyone is a citizen of a country, and the country makes the rules based on consensus.
Close. He said everyone is an owner. He's going with your owner of the house idea, and he's saying that everybody who is a citizen of a country is an owner of that country, and therefore you need a mechanism to create consensus between the owners.
Yeah, well, see, I like things that are real. I'm not really much of a let's make believe, let's pretend. I don't know what it means to be owner of a country. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know what it is you own. I'm an owner of my car because I bought my car and I acquired it from someone else. I'm an owner of my house. You know, I'm an owner of my cell phone because I bought this cell phone. That to me is real. I like to dispense with fictional type of things because if everybody's an owner, that's exactly the same as saying nobody is an owner, right? Because if you think about it, take a piece of property and say, what's the difference between everybody owns it and nobody owns it? It's really the same thing. That's not ownership at all. Ownership is the ability to exclude other people from using it. They have to ask your permission to use it. Where is it in the country? Somebody's got to ask your permission to use it. So I think that's a fiction. That to me is just bullshit that is being fed to you by the government. That's not real ownership of anything. Real ownership is, say, maybe the money in your wallet. If you've got money in your wallet, you're the owner of that. Take your body. You're the owner of that. You get to control that. Everybody's not an interest holder in your body. And what's nice about real property is when you own the property, actually, you wind up taking better care of it. When everybody owns the property, which is nobody owns the property, nobody really has much of a stake in taking care of anything. That's why that's more of a socialist concept. And that's the same reason governments spend money out of control, right? Because no one person is actually responsible for the money. But if it was your money that was being spent, you would feel differently about it than sort of everybody's money being spent. So I like to try to focus on what's real. And this is very hard sometimes because we've all been sort of brainwashed into society, into certain things, like even countries. I'm not really that much concerned about countries. I don't think, for example, we have a big issue here in the United States now about immigration. If you're born on the north side of our south border, I'm in Arizona, so we border Mexico. If you're born on the north side of that, you're a citizen. If you're born on the south side of that, you're not a citizen. I don't really care much about that. I think people are people. I care about who owns the property. So my property, I don't let anybody just trespass on. Only people get to come there who are invited. And that's really all I have to say about the issue. Wherever other people go in the world isn't my issue. I only speak about my property. So I don't feel that the people who are born north of the border are any more important than the people who are born south of the border. They're all people to me. I look at what's real. That's an artificial line that was put there for political reasons, and people are people to me. And I can tell you, the more you travel around the world and the more you meet people, people are much more the same than they are different. We speak different languages, we eat different foods, there are some cultural differences, all of that's true. But the important stuff is pretty much all the same. We all want our kids to do well. We all like hanging out with our friends. We all like eating good food. We all like to travel and see other places. We all have a certain sense of integrity with our friends. People are pretty much the same everywhere in the world. And so I've come to the conclusion that this whole country thing is really more of a fiction than anything else. I like to deal with what's real. I try to interact with my friend Alessandro in Rome. He's a lawyer in Rome. He's an Italian citizen. He's exactly the same to me as my friends here in Arizona. I treat them the same way. That they're in different countries is irrelevant to me. I don't care about that. You see what I'm saying?
Let's go with another question in the first time.
Yeah, I have a question about private judicial system you noticed. Why do you think, like, for example, I don't know that much about judicial system in US, but I know something about judicial system in Ukraine, and it just doesn't work. Like, it is quite corrupted. Like, judges make decisions in favor of those who just very often to those people who brought them more money. Why do you think that the private system can fix it or can make it better, or it just will be, just official? Why do you think that people from business will not make decisions in favor of those who will propose them better deal, even if it just will be done not officially?
It's actually a really good question. Yeah, it's about privatizing the justice system. It's an excellent question, and it's one that a lot of libertarians have a very hard time with. How do we get a private justice system, private police, national defense. Those are, and for some reason, roads. Those are the ones that people have lots of difficulty with. And I hate to punt on the question, but I will say this. I really, really recommend that you get that book by Murray Rothbard and listen to it, because he covers private justice system in great detail, better than I've ever heard anybody cover that issue. But in essence, this is really about solving disputes. That's what justice systems do. They solve disputes between people. The first thing I would want to do is make sure we're aligned in the right direction. We can't have a corrupt justice system. If you have a corrupt system, then what you've done is ruined capitalism, because people don't want to invest and they don't want to buy property because they're afraid that their property rights won't be respected. So you've already killed your entire economy. This is one of the reasons that, for example, Mexico isn't a superpower, because Americans would love to go to Mexico. People like me, I'd love to go to Mexico and buy a nice house in Mexico on the beach. The government completely prohibits me doing that in the first place, because only Mexican citizens can buy homes on the beach. But second, I don't have good confidence that the Mexican government is going to respect my claim of ownership. Therefore, I don't invest. So you can't get anything going with corruption. You have to get rid of corruption, first of all. But second, justice systems resolve disputes. That's what they do. If it's a planned dispute, if we know we're going to enter into a transaction and we might have a dispute down the road, that's very easy. We have private arbitration. If you and I are going to engage in some kind of a transaction, we could both agree. If we get into a dispute, Lobo's going to decide who's right and who's wrong. And if we don't trust each other, there are things we can still do. I could give him some money to hold. You could give him some money to hold. However he decides, he distributes the money in that direction. Planned transactions are very, very, very easy. The harder question are criminal transactions, where we have a violation of the non-initiation of force principle. And really the only issue there is, how do we fund it? Because as long as they're doing the right thing, see, I never bag on government. Me and a lot of libertarians, we use different language. I don't say I'm anti-government at all, and I'm not anti-government. I'm anti-coercion. So I don't care if you want to form a government, as long as that government is not initiating force. If all it's doing is protecting rights, I don't have any problem with it, as long as it's funded peacefully. And a lot of people would pay for that service for sure. So, and also I think there's a lot to be said about private charity. I think governments run a lot of welfare and things of that nature. But the truth is, there's a huge market for private charity, and if the government got out of the welfare business, because there are people who legitimately need help, who can't get out and work on their own and do these kinds of things, and are born with horrible problems. There's no shortage of people, especially in a free society where standards of living have risen dramatically and people have disposable income. There is no shortage of people willing to give money for these private charities. But maybe a shorter way of saying it is, insurance companies will resolve a lot of these issues. And I think the more you learn about insurance is, to me, a very, very fascinating topic. But I would really highly enthusiastically recommend you listen to that Murray Rothbard book. And then if you have questions after that, feel free to email me through my website. Just go to attorneyforfreedom.com, and I'd love to follow up with you.
Just narrowly, Mark, very specifically about the context of corruption. I think the question was, would private juries or private jury companies work if there's corruption? And, you know, people are bribing judges. Why would they bribe the private companies?
Well, you know, the good news is the difference between the private sector and the public sector is, if there will be corruption and there will be fraud. I am not a utopian, for sure. People will get bribed and things of that nature. But the difference is, in the private sector, if they're bribed and they're doing bad things, we can fire them. We can use a different jury pool. We can use a different provider of services. And there's no doubt in my mind that that will happen. Fraud happens. But what I would do, if I was running a private jury pool selection, I would hold myself out as the most fair, not bribed, and I would hire an independent third party, maybe like Lobo, to come in and just do an evaluation and do an inspection to make sure that there's no bribery, whatever he came up with to do, and then he could sort of certify that Marc's jurors have not been bribed. And if you trust Lobo and his services, then you'd feel pretty sure using me as a jury provider. But again, as information flows freely, just like eBay. At first, when eBay came out, I thought this will never work because people are on the internet and fraud is so easy. How can I ever trust somebody in another country to do a transaction? I have no way. But eBay figured it out, right? They have this rating system, and people get these ratings about it was a good deal or a bad deal, and they take them very seriously. And if I see someone on eBay with a bad rating, I don't do business with them. And if I see a good rating, it makes me encouraged to do a good business with them. And not only that, eBay also provides for escrow services. I can pay eBay, and they can hold the money, and then they can distribute after I receive the goods. So my point here is the private sector has come up with many things to deal with the issues of fraud and coercion. And in a free market where information flows so freely, if someone is running a service and committing fraud, people are going to find out and they're going to go out of business pretty fast. So I'm not saying nobody will be defrauded ever. I'm not a utopian. People will get defrauded. It's just when they do, other people will hear about it and will refuse to do business with them going forward. So in a free market with information flowing freely, the people who get rewarded are the ones who do a good job over the long term.
Thank you.
Other questions? Speak up.
Okay. If a government has a monopoly on force, is there any way that you can prevent it or from abusing it?
I don't think the government should have a monopoly on force. I'm not a big fan of monopolies. I'm not a big fan of government to begin with. My goal is to reduce the amount of force in society, but I think the way you do that is you have different force providers. And again, that Murray Rothbard book really deals with this very issue on point, does a very, very good job on it. So I'd encourage you to listen to that. He has different police agencies, each one independent. You know, a point that he makes in the book is, you know, different countries are already in a sort of an anarchist state with other countries, right? The United States and Canada, we don't have some overarching rules. We deal with Canada through treaties and things of that nature the same way we deal with Mexico. And so if countries can do this on a larger level, why can't sort of in smaller group states do this, and even smaller cities do this with each other? I like the concept of bringing the sovereign power down to a lower and lower and lower level. And the reason that's a good thing is because if one of these sovereign powers is going crazy, doing nutty things, it's very easy, if they're small, for me to move from one to the next. Really, at the end of the day, that's the vision of a libertarian as I see it. It's very, very small little groups that are each sovereign. And so if you don't like what's going on, you don't have to move countries to some other big giant country with a whole new set of rules. You can just move over to the next town or city. And what's that going to do? It's going to force the tyrannical town or city to change the way they do business or to lose people. And so overall, what you're really talking about is competition among small sovereigns. I think that's a great situation. And I think if people want freedom, they'll get freedom. And if people want socialism, they should have socialism as well. I'm not an enemy of socialism. If people voluntarily want to live in a socialist society, they have every right to live that way. The only objection I have to it is their ability to drag other people into it who don't want to be a part of it. That's an important distinction. Question?
Yeah, connected to the first one. Is American judicial system is corrupted? And the first. Second one, because of what reasons do you think that private system will be, judicial system will be better for America? Because of what? Inefficiency, like law, education, why? For what reasons?
What I got from that is really the question, is the judicial system in America corrupt, right?
That was the first one, yes.
Yeah.
What was the
and the second one.
No, wait, let's one at a time. Is the judicial system in the United States corrupt in your view?
The answer to that is an unqualified no. I have seen absolutely no corruption at any level, in any place, at any time. I've also spoken with many other criminal defense lawyers. A lot of libertarians don't like that answer. But if we're defining corruption in terms of payoffs and bribes and things like that, I can tell you absolutely not. That doesn't mean that there are not isolated examples of that when it can happen. But on an institutional type level, I will tell you both, we are neither corrupt nor are we racist. The American criminal justice system is not racist against black people or any other group. It's just not the case. That doesn't mean there aren't isolated examples here and there. But again, you mostly will get a fair trial. If what you mean by corrupt is our laws are screwed up, then yes, I would have to agree with that. What was the second part of the question?
So what do you don't like in this system, and what private system will make better?
What does what look like?
If it's not corrupt, why
That's
do you
wrong.
need a private system instead?
Well, it's not that we need a private system. Our laws are wrong. If we could just change our laws to, for example, in the criminal justice system, if we could change the laws and make them all victimless crimes, then my only beef with America's justice system is that it's funded through taxation. If we could get rid of the coercion and taxation in terms of how it was funded, I would have no issue with it at all. In fact, that's not really high on my list of things that need to be fixed. I would fix the law. But the criminal justice system, we do a pretty good job in terms of giving people a reasonably fair trial. In fact, when I talk to my friend Alessandro, who's in Italy, and he talks about the trial you get in Italy, both of us agree you're going to get a much more fair trial here. It is corrupt there. People are paid off there. It is who you know there. It's not the case here. And so I just want to be fair in terms of my criticisms, fair and even-handed about it.
Would you encourage young people to study law? Like this?
Absolutely, I would. It was the best education that I ever got the entire time. I think you can do more to affect change, at least in the lives of one at a time. I've saved more people from a tyrannical police state just working as a criminal defense lawyer than probably anything else I've done. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of studying the law. That's where the rubber hits the road, right? I mean, that's the place where the government grabs you and hauls you into the system and puts you in a cage. I think we need more libertarians there. We need more libertarian defense attorneys, prosecutors, and judges and cops. Absolutely. That you could make more of a difference there probably than anywhere else. I'm a big fan of that.
How many libertarians do you know among, like, within judicial system? Not all the system in law.
How many other libertarians do you know in the justice system?
There's not a lot, but I would say there's probably about the same percentage in the justice system as about in the general population. I run into libertarian prosecutors. In fact, a very good libertarian friend of mine named Clint Bolick, I don't know if you know him, Lobo, or not, he was just appointed to the Arizona Supreme Court. And he is a real libertarian on the Supreme Court in Arizona right now. So, again, things are moving in the right direction. And I run into real libertarian prosecutors, and John Budrick is a libertarian judge out here in Arizona. So they're out there, and there are other libertarians like me doing criminal defense as well. We tend to gravitate towards the defense side of things, but there definitely are libertarians, lots of them, in our justice system. That's about all the time I have.
We're out. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Mark.
All right, guys. Can you send me a link to this?
Yes.
All right.